Welcome back to Psychedelic Therapy Frontiers, a podcast devoted to exploring the frontiers of psychedelic medicine and what it takes to cultivate a healthy body, mind, and spirit. I'm Reid Robison, psychiatrist and chief clinical officer at Numinous. My co-host is the illustrious Dr. Steve Thayer, as you may know from the streets as the man with the ever-growing beard. Steve recently returned from the MAPS MDMA therapist training retreat, so we thought we'd discuss his recent experience while it's fresh and reflect on mine from a couple years back during that trippy pandemic thing we all went through. In this episode, we discuss the differences between the live and the Zoom versions of this training, some of the goals and challenges MAPS is working feverishly on tackling when it comes to training enough MDMA therapists, training good quality MDMA trauma therapists, accessibility, feasibility, and other post-approval issues as this medicine forges ahead and is poised to perhaps become the first psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy approved by the FDA in the near future. So, without further ado, I present to you our conversation and Steve's trip report about MDMA therapist training. Here we go.
And we're back for another episode of Psychedelic Therapy Frontiers. I guess I'm back. I was absent for a week or so.
Welcome back.
Okay, I was waiting for you to welcome me back.
It's good to have you.
Yes, it's good to have me back. I was off at the MAPS MDMA therapist training retreat in Colorado at the Drala Mountain Center. It used to be called the Shambhala Mountain Center, I guess, up in the Rocky Mountains. It was awesome. And so I wanted to come back and give kind of a trip report for our listeners, because I know a lot of you folks are therapists, healers, helpers, people interested in the psychedelic renaissance. And MAPS is a huge player. So thought we'd get into it.
An OG of the modern renaissance. They've been doing this for like 35 years. Bless Rick Doblin's heart for the foresight, persistence, the stick-to-itiveness. It's amazing. And I can't wait to hear an update. So tell us everything.
It is amazing. I think, MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, founded in the 80s, right? 86, I think. Rick, as you gave him the shout out, he tried his best to prevent the DEA from scheduling MDMA Schedule 1, and against the judge's opinion, actually. I think the DEA went ahead and scheduled it. So MAPS has been carrying the torch for psychedelic research, MDMA in particular, for a long, long time. And they're the ones who are doing the studies on MDMA-assisted therapy for PTSD. The ones you always hear, if you follow this work at all, that you hear the cool stats about, like phase 3 data that we've talked about it on the show. In fact, we talked about it during our MDMA episode a couple of episodes ago. So if you're new to the podcast, you want to hear more about the medicine and about the therapy, you can go back and listen to our MDMA episode.
On the medicine point, though, just to check in on something that's kind of traveling through the grapevine, is did they talk about the delay in submission to the FDA?
They did.
Okay. Any word on the street?
Yeah,
update
what
for
they
us?
told me, and this is, I went to this training September of 2022, was that they think they're going to submit end of 2023, and that approval, if it happens, will probably be sometime early 2024 now.
Okay. Yeah, so pushed back a handful of months.
Yeah. Not years, thankfully. And I do want to talk about post-approval, because there were a lot of questions asked at the retreat about what this is actually going to look like practically, so we'll get there. Don't let me forget. But this training was awesome. The Drala Mountain Center is beautiful. It's a divine place. It's a spiritual place. It's, up in the mountains. If any of you follow me on Instagram, like all two of you who follow me on Instagram saw me post pictures and videos of the stupa, of the beautiful surroundings. I saw a bobcat.
Thought it was a cougar for a minute.
Thank heaven it was not a cougar. That would have been uncharacteristic of a mountain lion to be that close to human beings, although bobcats are pretty skittish creatures as well.
Did you get to pet it?
I went up and had a conversation with it. It was pretty awkward, but no, I did not pet it. They encourage us not to feed the wildlife or interact with it.
Or touch the Buddha statues.
Correct. There were some cool gold mushrooms growing around the stupa, actually, that I took some pictures of too. Did not ingest.
Yeah.
I don't know my mushrooms well enough to just eat random stuff out of the ground.
Golden mycelium. I would be curious.
But yeah, it was just a beautiful setting. I was really pleased to have gone there. I was able to drive there, which was great. I like long drives by myself.
Many of the great meditation masters have walked those spaces. That's pretty neat.
Founded by Rinpoche Chogyam.
Trungpa
Rinpoche. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the setting was really beautiful, and the staff there was amazing, and the food was actually pretty good. I was expecting, I don't know, Best Western hotel fare, but it was good food.
Colorado is somewhat of a mecca, in the mountains and in the towns. You'll find a lot of like spirituality, transpersonal therapy, hotspots, birthplaces, like a lot of psychedelic renaissance activity going on out there, including your trainers, Bruce and Marcella.
Yeah, Bruce Poulter, Marcella Odalora are stationed there in Colorado.
Yeah.
They were the lead trainers, and just, magical people. I was discouraged from calling them angels by Chantel Thomas, one of the other trainers there. She's like, they're human beings. And I know that, but they're just special people. Between the two of them, they've done over 500 of these MDMA assisted therapy sessions in research. And, watching the case presentation videos from the studies was so humbling, because these are people who have, arguably treatment-resistant PTSD. These are folks that are really struggling. And the model is, they call it an inner-directed approach. So there's not a lot of external direction from the therapist. It's a lot of, as we've talked about on the show before, inner healing intelligence work.
I like the inner-directed instead of the non-directive that used to be cited a lot. Like just non-directive, but that term feels a little aimless.
Yeah, and it's definitely not aimless. Like watching it wasn't just Bruce and Marcella on these case presentation videos. They had a whole panel of therapists up there talking about their participation in the studies. But yeah, I really liked the inner-directed approach, especially when using medicine. And as you say, it's not really, as you inferred, it's not really aimless.
It encourages you to check in or go back inside, and not maybe wander aimlessly on mind tangents, or it prevents the therapist from imposing like a vector of their belief system and their values.
And one thing that they pointed out in the training is that this kind of approach is truly empowering for the client. Right? They're not becoming a devotee of the therapist or dependent on the medicine. This is inner resourcing, providing, they use this phrase, safe working conditions, meaning that as a therapist, we're going to help people stay in their window of tolerance. If they start looping on a particular thing, or if it's too much, we can help them engage their resources, deep breathing, whatever, to get back into their window of tolerance and give them breaks. They talked about the healing process through MDMA therapy being nonlinear. And that's okay. It doesn't have to just follow stepwise until you're all cured.
There is no predetermined path of healing, especially not a one-size-fits-all predictable path.
Right. So that's kind of the model, this inner-directed approach, very much focused on empowering the client and facilitating the work done by this innate healing wisdom, inner healing intelligence, pick your phrase, to refer to this tendency inside of us. And
that nonlinear approach means that as a therapist, you trust that what comes up is supposed to come up, and that's the content that emerges for a reason and the content to follow. And you trust that it comes up in the order it should.
Mm-hmm. So what does this look like practically? I'm not going to reveal any details about the case presentation videos because they're confidential, but there's a person on MDMA. We assume these are study patients, but it looked like it to me. And this person's heavily traumatized by the death of a loved one, violent death of a loved one. And they're experiencing a lot of fear because they're finally, after several sessions, able to kind of go back to the scene of the accident, and memories are coming back. And the therapists are encouraging them just to be afraid. Like you're saying, whatever comes up is what needs to come up. And it's not, okay, let's make sure you can like process the fear and not feel it anymore. It's, okay, be afraid. Stay with it. Stay with it. Stay with it. It's a great example of how trauma seems to be like unprocessed data stuck in the nervous system, and that you address it by bringing it back up so that it can complete the arc it never got to complete with new insights, with new somatic awareness, with new reference points.
As you trust the unfolding, that is a little different for everyone.
And it, as I'm watching the videos, it's occurring to me that this is challenging to trust sometimes, especially if you're a therapist who hasn't done a lot of trauma work or hasn't done a lot of somatic trauma work. Like at one point, poor little Marcella's got this pillow that she's hiding behind because the client wants to kick against something. And so, she's like, don't boot me in the face, but yeah, kick, push with your feet. And so just bracing behind this pillow. And the participant, in this case, because it's a study, is pushing with their feet. There was another one that they showed a person whose trauma was sexual assault. And that one cracked me open. I mean, there wasn't a dry eye in the audience. This poor woman.
Wow.
And she's basically reliving it, yelling, "I'm not a toy, get off of me." And these videos, such great training tools for us to be able to see the therapy being done, see, people really struggle, and the therapists sitting with them, again, redirecting them inward, helping them resource. But it made me wonder about when this therapy hopefully gets approved, how many therapists are going to be able to do this, and how often they're going to be able to do this, just because it's so intense. It can be really intense.
And time consuming. So you were saying 2,500 people have been trained so far?
Maybe a little less, yeah.
Yeah. I think the last metric I saw was like 2,000, but that was a little bit outdated earlier in the year. Still impressive given that the medicine is not approved yet.
Yeah.
Like that's ahead of the curve of, many others like Compass and USONA that are mostly training people working on the studies.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the training is not complete until approval, because there's 3 stages to MAPS training. There's this online asynchronous content. There's the retreat. That's stage 1. Then there's an experiential elective, meaning they want people to have therapists to have the experience of a non-ordinary state.
Yeah.
Whether it's MDMA or breath work, of course, legal. And then after that, you're supposed to do something like 40 hours of supervised MDMA-assisted therapy, where 18 of those hours are supposed to be medicine sessions, and you got to submit your videos for supervision, which is great. I think this kind of therapy needs thorough training. But again, it's going to make it really, really, it's a high bar for a lot of therapists. And
it's a bottleneck of access, like perhaps a necessary one. But when we were at the Horizons conference last December, and MAPS shared their goal of getting 30,000 therapists trained by 2030, so they could treat 1 million clients by 2030. That's a lot. That's a lot.
Yeah, it's ambitious, and I mean, Rick, if anything, is ambitious.
Yeah.
And I like it. I like the ambitious goal, but that's one thing we did talk about at the training, is what post-approval is going to look like. And I was pleased to hear the honesty from the panel. Like, we don't really know, because we're not sure what the stipulations will be once the FDA approves, right? Are they going to require the dyad model? Are they going to require somebody be an MD or a PhD? We've seen that in other clinical trials.
Yeah.
Are they going to require the second therapist to be licensed and trained in the same way that the lead therapist is? Are they going to require us to follow the study protocol, where you have 3 medicine sessions and, 12 or so preparation integration type sessions?
What is a little more predictable, based on what we know about FDA approval process and post-approval regulations, is there will be a REMS. And this is me speaking from 250 clinical trials.
Right.
And MAPS discussions about it. And there will be a REMS, a risk evaluation management system, where prescribers and probably the therapists and pharmacies working with it and patients will need to get registered in the system for tracking prevention of diversion. This is a Schedule 1 medicine going for approval, and for managing, monitoring potential risk. According to MAPS, there will be a prescriber, kind of a mini training for prescribers of the medicine specifically, who may or may not be part of the dyad, the therapy team, but they might just have to do a 30-hour training like you might do if you're prescribing medical cannabis in Utah or whatever it may be, like Suboxone has its own training. So you get well-versed in the medicine, but without the whole multi-phase experiential training with video feedback.
Right, right. Those are good perspectives. Do you think, you mentioned the possibility of diversion. Do you think the prescription is going to be like, here's your MDMA, go pick it up at Walgreens?
No. It'll come to the clinic.
Right.
Yeah, just like it'll be like Spravato. I'm pretty confident, but even more tightly monitored. Like Spravato, S-ketamine, has to come to the clinic, and we have to dispense it in here. Can't be taken home. Can't be shipped to the patient's home.
Right.
There are different versions of these REMS systems. Like if you get a prescription for Accutane, there's a REMS that's more about the risk, that makes you get a pregnancy test if you're a female before you can fill your next prescription, because of the risk of birth defects, for example. Yeah.
That does make sense. And probably taking some cues from the ketamine treatment market right now, with some of these companies providing at-home ketamine via online clinics folding. And there being lots of stories about people getting a crap ton of ketamine at home, and that stuff gets diverted.
Yeah. So MDMA will not look like that.
Right.
But I love how proactive MAPS is being in terms of, like last year, they even published a cost effectiveness study that was overwhelmingly positive. And that kind of data will be so useful in getting insurance companies to more quickly adopt it and approve it. There will be a prior authorization process. This I'm also confident about, where someone comes into clinic, severe PTSD, we submit them to both the REMS and to the insurance company for payment approval. And, it might take a little bit to work out the kinks of the billing codes, but then, and to get that turnaround time shortened. But whether it takes a couple days or a couple weeks, we'll get the yes or no back from the insurance company, and we can appeal it if it's denied. But if someone comes in, meets the PTSD criteria, it's FDA approved, there's a cost effectiveness study, I'm pretty confident that we can get them approved rather quickly for most of the major insurance plans. At least whatever your portion of coverage is, there will still be a co-pay, which is another challenge.
Right. So you don't see it being prescribed off label for anything. It's just going to be PTSD.
You can't. Yeah, just like we cannot prescribe Spravato off label because of the REMS, at least for the foreseeable future. And that means we can't prescribe it for kids.
Right.
Yeah.
They are going to do some adolescent studies, I think, right?
Yeah.
And the FDA say that was part of the deal.
Yeah, that's the kind of, I think it's good of the FDA, and I know it's controversial a little bit. There's some debate about it. I've even seen the Twitter feeds recently when Rick mentioned it in a conference, but the FDA is good about, after the adult studies are done or early in the process, have your adolescent and your pediatric strategies, because one, kids are not just little adults. There need to be careful studies done. And two, PTSD does affect a number of young individuals, tragically.
Yeah, there was a lot of talk about the potential for benefit with couples, right? I know it was used a lot for couples therapy back in the day before it was made illegal, and especially couples where there's PTSD involved. That's why I wonder if that's a potential workaround, where you've got either both. I was talking to some folks from the VA. There was a big contingent there from the VA that they're going to be doing studies at the VA with MDMA assisted therapy, but like about maybe if not both members of the couple, but at least one has PTSD? Can we do, conjoint PTSD therapy for the couple with MDMA?
One study's been done, and Wagner led that study out of Toronto, and she was actually my small group leader. Was yours Chantel
It was,
Thomas?
yeah.
So Ann Wagner was mine when I did the MDMA therapy training last year, maybe spring or something, mid-COVID. But
So yours was all online, right?
yeah, that was different. They did the best job at online training I had yet in terms of small groups and like as much heart as you can infuse into Zoom, which kudos to Michael and Annie and MAPS for doing that. But Ann Wagner did one couple study where one member of the partnership had PTSD, but both got to receive MDMA. And there's a lot of data showing how PTSD can wreak havoc and cause a lot of negative consequences in the whole family unit.
Right.
And the study was really positive using this conjoint couples therapy approach for PTSD with MDMA. But again, that would be kind of like another indication. Like Spravato, once approved in 2019 for TRD, treatment-resistant depression, the next year or two, the second indication came along because they did studies of suicidality. So MAPS would need to do the other studies in order to get the other things added to the label.
So a little bit more about my experience at the training retreat. The panel was amazing. As I mentioned, Chantel Thomas was my small group leader. So there was about, 60, 70, maybe 100, I don't remember, 100 people there or so. And they'd break us into these home groups of about 10 and then smaller practice groups of about 5 where we got to do actual vignettes where some of us would role play a client, we'd role play a therapy dyad, we'd have observers. And those were incredibly useful to be able to actually get in and play around with this inner-directed approach, this model. And then in the home groups, they were basically like a process group at the end of the day. At least that's how Chantel ran ours, where we were reflecting on the content of the day, reflecting on just how emotionally challenging the training was. And then the content itself, I just snagged the outline just to quickly go through it because I thought it was good. They had an intro and an overview of MAPS. They talked about prep sessions, the inner healing intelligence, the inner-directed approach, therapeutic alliance, multiplicity, which was kind of their nod to selves, multiple parts, right? I know that Bruce and Marcella are not IFS devotees, but there was, there was a lot of IFS content in there as well.
Michael Mithofer was a student or intern or trainee of Dick Schwartz. They go way back.
Oh, really?
They're friends, yeah.
And I did hear that the trainings led by the Mithofers tend to be more IFS leaning.
Yeah, because Marcella comes from a deep background in Hakomi, among other approaches. And Bruce comes at it as a nurse.
And he was a body worker for 25 years. He was a Rolfer.
Amazing.
Which I didn't know. Which was cool because he had some interesting insights about physical touch. There was a lot of great conversation around touch because, there was people who were traumatized for one, people in altered states for two, and then a lot of these traumas are sexual in nature.
Yeah.
And then we talked a lot about the presence of power differentials in the therapy room, and hierarchies and, men and women and race and people of, people with minority status, like being mindful of all these things.
Yeah.
But especially as it relates to touch. So there were great examples in the videos of how touch was key, was crucial for people's healing experience. And I thought the people who demonstrated it in the videos did a really good job of getting informed consent. A lot of good conversations about consent too, because, consent given when sober isn't the same as consent given or rescinded when in a non-ordinary state.
Yeah. Although rescinded consent should always be respected.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. But it's tricky to know what to do with consent given during that altered state, right? Yeah. It's so important to have the dialogue beforehand and be clear and give examples of the kinds of touch and how to ask for it. Given that you're going to be going into this therapeutic state of consciousness and openness. Yeah.
And I loved the bravery and the transparency of the panel when they talked about the Cover Story podcast that sort of blew up this incident where there was sexual abuse by this therapy dyad in a MAPS trial in Canada. They gave us some more perspective on that, which I thought was great. But yeah, lots of good content around physical touch. They talked about somatic awareness, working with a co-therapist, right? That's unless you're a really seasoned group practitioner where, a lot of groups are led by more than one group facilitator. You haven't had a lot of experience as a clinician working with a co-therapist.
Yeah, it's a new approach, and you've got to be able to harmonize. And I love how Bruce and Marcella, I've heard them talk about it, and Michael and Annie talk about how that doesn't mean they need to be perfect. It means any kind of differences, disagreements they have need to show up in this container of love, like a corrective experience and something that's navigated very gently, because it is a state of such openness and vulnerability, and the energy is palpable of whatever happens in that room.
Right. Yeah, you don't need to model perfection as a therapy dyad. You need to model how to cope with your own imperfections in a healthy way.
Yeah.
And I think they did that very well. And also, Bruce emphasized the importance of the debrief. Like if you're a therapy dyad, debrief after you do these therapies. You need to talk about what happens. Any transference or countertransference, even between the two of you, needs to be addressed. And
setting the stage for it whenever possible, both clearing your own energy and being mindful of it, but going in with that kind of harmonized approach, or that spirit of like, we're going to bring in, a really positive working dyad together into the room.
Right. They also talked about, non-linguistic knowledge, just ways of accumulating and accessing knowledge in the body and other senses.
Embodied knowing.
Yes. Integration, suicidal ideation, attunement, rupture and repair, which was a lot of good content on therapeutic rupture and repair. Self-care, the use of music. I thought this was fun. This was led by Paul Uwe. He says hi, by the way. But he let us.
Amazing.
We all laid down on our yoga mats and put eye shades on, and he did like a little guided music experience for us. And it was profound. He's quite the psychedelic DJ.
That's cool. He's a brilliant psychiatrist and philosopher, therapist. Yeah.
He would speak in TED Talk, like he would just this impassioned, speech, and people. There were a couple comments afterward, like, "Oh, Paul, that should be a TED Talk." So that was really, really cool. He talked about structuring the musical arc so that it sort of mirrors the trajectory of the MDMA experience, with a ramp up, a plateau, and a come down. And he gave us a little sample of that.
What Bruce Poulter said to me once in some supervision, music is the wind in the sails of the psychedelic experience.
I like that.
Yeah.
I like that a lot.
Yeah, that stuck with me.
And we saw it in the case presentations. There was one participant that they allowed to have her own music, because typically they have sort of the approved playlist and they're just going to play that. But for this person, it was relevant to her trauma. And so she went back and forth from kind of listening to her own music, which we could hear in the video was like, it was EDM, basically. It was like dance music, but, and so she found that to be really, really important for her process.
Spangle, maybe?
Wasn't she Spangle? Shout out to Spangle.
DMT music.
Yeah. And then, we talked about dissociation, transference, countertransference. Yeah, all really, really relevant topics. The online material, I should say, that we did, 40, 60 hours of it in preparation for this.
60 hours.
Yeah. It was a lot. Comprehensive, but well done. The learning management system they have was great, and the instructional design I thought was well considered.
And MAPS as a public benefit, Corp, B Corp, nonprofit, they've got all this clever organization for their social mission. They released the MDMA therapy training manual publicly, so you can go look for the PDF and read it, which is, I think, very generous of them.
Yeah, a lot of good content in there. let's see. We talked about the inner-directed approach. And, they did say there's no guarantee the FDA is going to approve this, which, it was quite a financial investment to go out there and get trained. But I will say, even if the FDA doesn't, for whatever wild reason, doesn't approve MDMA-assisted therapy, this training was incredibly valuable to me personally. Professionally, certainly, like I'm reconsidering the way I approach therapy, regardless if it's psychedelic assisted. But I met some really amazing people, and this training helped me reconsider just some life philosophies as well. It was as much a personal care retreat as it was a professional training retreat for me.
And this is an impossible question, I know, but any tidbits of that you can share, like any takeaways or stuff that's alive in your heart you're pulling from that retreat personally?
Yeah, I think the emphasis on the inner-directed approach I feel so conflicted about. Because I've been trained in a lot of different therapy approaches.
Yeah.
And some of my concern or resistance, like I should say, to the inner-directed approach is a lack of trust in my own inner healer. So I was grappling with that, right? I'm a person who tends to overthink and doubt his own thinking. I try to solve, this is me at sort of my least evolved. I try to solve my problems of thought with more thought.
My mind is smart, and I know I got to tame the monkey mind.
Exactly. Yeah. Trying to tame the monkey mind by appealing to the monkey mind is like a bad move. And
that's the labyrinth.
Yeah. So here I'm trying to I'm seeing the value of the inner-directed approach, of the trust in the inner healing intelligence. I've certainly felt close contact with my inner healer before, with my innate healing tendency, with the God within. But man, I don't spend a lot of time in his chair. So yeah, I was being invited to really do some soul searching as I considered doing this work when it happens, the MDMA assisted therapy work, but also adjusting my own approach with my current clients, my ketamine clients, and then my non-medicine clients.
And your own work too, like in that spirit of doing your own work, or like Marcella said, you can only hold people suffering if you're not afraid of your own. But I think along those same lines, you've got to be able to trust your inner healer with conviction to be able to prepare people for this and guide them through it. And
I mentioned this to Marcella, it makes me worry that this bar is really high for the kinds of therapists who can do MDMA assisted therapy for really tough PTSD cases, because it requires a level of self-awareness that I think is hard to achieve. And I mean, these are things that really, if you want to be a therapist at all, you should do work around, but especially for this type of work using this particular model.
Did they give that acronym that I got in my MDMA therapy training of WAIT?
Why am I talking? Yeah.
That's a good one. But one thing that I had a similar kind of pause when it came to the inner healer and checking in on it. I was like, what do oops, I'm fiddling with a beeping phone next to me.
Yeah, they'll forgive us.
They will forgive us. So something that helped me with this inner healing approach and this non-directive approach that I like, the inner directed comment, because there's this aspect of discernment and where you're helping the client figure out how to trust and what to trust and how it feels and how to get beyond the labyrinth of the mind. And you also acknowledge the fact that there are some big paradoxes in this work of, the order and the chaos and the nonlinear approach. And, you're inviting the client to check in. You're reacting kind of reflexively with these gentle, subtle cues, but without feedback or directing your beliefs,
Right. And I will say that reflecting on what I just said a few minutes ago, I'm feeling maybe more self-conscious than I needed to be. I have done interdirected approach work in ketamine-assisted therapy in the clinical trials that I've done, and it's worked out great.
Oh, yeah.
So the bar's not impossibly high. I've seen it work.
And when you talk to the OGs who were doing this work before MDMA became a Schedule I illicit banned substance, like I remember talking to a lot of these folks, including like Phil Wolfson, and I think Bruce, was he doing it before?
I think so.
Yeah. They were like, man, we felt like the baddest ass therapist back then because, you get out of the way of the medicine and you learn after those 500 sessions they've done, they just learn to trust the unfolding because look at the numbers. It is the most powerful tool for healing severe PTSD that we've ever seen in this field.
Yeah, absolutely. And they were careful to say it's not a magic bullet, of course, and we're not implying that it is, and it doesn't work for everybody, and
it's not 100%.
won't do the work for you, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was an amazing training. Props to MAPS for putting together a really thorough and inspiring training at a beautiful location with really intelligent folks.
You're glowing, so
I just
did something.
Glowing from the inside out, yeah.
Thanks for sharing, though.
Yeah. If you like what you heard, please subscribe to the podcast on whatever platform you're using to listen or watch. Also, if you're feeling generous today, please leave us a glowing review on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you like to listen. Thanks again. The content of this podcast does not constitute medical advice or mental health treatment. Consult with a medical or mental health professional if you believe you are in need of mental health treatment.